and pieces that you can go through once we've done the session. So this week, this will be the second session that we'll do. And I don't know in terms of your availability for tomorrow, but if your availability is there for tomorrow as well, then what we are going to do is obviously discuss LO3 tomorrow. And then for last one, which is learning outcome 4 and the assignment discussion, we'll do next week. So that will allow you to essentially, complete this unit as far as, teaching is concerned.
Okay, and tomorrow at 12?
Tomorrow we can do the session, usual timing of 11 a.m. because I don't have a lecture in the morning. So I can do 11 and I can send that schedule off to you just after, the class today. And if you're available on Friday, we can do learning outcome 4 on Friday as well. So I'm available on Thursday and Friday both.
I think on Friday I'm working day shift, but
so we'll keep it for Thursday, and next week you tell me what days are convenient. So we'll do the learning outcome 4 and the assignment discussion on those days. Next week, any idea what days are you going to be available?
Yes, let me check. So for tomorrow I'm okay. And for next week I have Monday.
Monday, okay.
And the 31st.
Monday and the 31st. So 28th and 31st. Okay. So I'll get those to you, the invites for tomorrow, Monday, which is 28th, and then the 31st, which will help us, complete this particular unit. That's great. Good stuff. So any questions that you have from yesterday's discussion?
No, not yet.
Any questions? Okay, that's fine. No problem. This is a general knowledge unit, as I put it this way, because the things which are happening, in terms of around us, in terms of if you listen into the news, or in general, if you tune into the news and television or any sort of media, on for about half an hour on a daily basis, you'll not be escaping this particular topic, which is globalization, global trade, trade sanctions, trade wars, and factors which affect this in general, which is things like fluctuation in exchange rates, currencies, Brent crude, the price of oil going up, or things like that. So they're all related to globalization. Now, in today's learning outcome, we are focused on discussing. Yesterday we looked at what is globalization, the origins of how this term came about. What do we see? Are different types of globalization, different eras of globalization. Today, our discussion is focused on, what are the factors which are going to drive globalization.
Okay.
So those are the bits that you are, focused on in terms of studying today's learning outcome, which is what is it that drives, the globalization, or the concept and the whole process of globalization, going forward. So what we are looking at in learning outcome 2 is understanding the drivers or factors which drive globalization. We are going to be focused on things like the assessment criteria in terms of understanding what is the term global economy, what does it mean, what is global business environment, and then in the end discuss what are the key global issues that most let's put it this way, countries, economies, and are areas of discussion when we look at talking about factors in general which are driving the whole concept of globalization across the world. Now, there is a fair bit of indicative content that we need to look at covering, and that is given here. So we'll be looking at things which are related to the role of WTO in particular. We'll also be looking at, some of the organizations that we talk about. I think in the first slide, we will look at understanding and just going through some of these in a bit more detail, which helps us understand how do we understand some of the major trading organizations in the world, or organizations which essentially help us understand this concept of how businesses, organizations actually drive, or conduct business across international geographies.
Okay.
So let me switch you over to a presentation. And what we want to be able to do in this case is primarily look at the aspect of, discussing some of the key bits in the learning outcome by looking at a video and some of the things that we will discuss, for the presentation. So let me just switch you over. Here we go. So as I mentioned, learning outcome 2 focused on understanding what are the factors which drive globalization. Now here, what we are looking at is let's look at putting one or two things into a bit of perspective. First part is, yesterday we understand what is globalization, how it has evolved, and what are the different types, and then what kind of positive or negative effects is globalization having on different countries, people, societies, communities across the globe. What we also need to look at is, in short, a concept in terms of what has caused this whole process of globalization. What has led, what are the factors which have led to essentially be talking about globalization? So one of the things which I mentioned to you yesterday was global village. And when I mentioned, global village to you, the reason I mentioned that was that we see that at some stage, because of the advances in technology, in telecommunication, and improvements in the system of transportation, and what we have generally seen that is there is increased mobility, which has favored let's say exchange of goods and services across borders. And when we look at the exchange of goods and services across borders, that means companies or countries and nations in general have had some sort of treaties or understanding which allow them to work and allow and facilitate this trade. So when we talk about the causes of globalization, we know that globalization is not a new phenomenon, because we see this from the timeline that we discussed yesterday, that pre-15th century, then 17th, 18th century, 19th, 20th century, and then 21st century. So we see things have been improving, progressively. So when we talk about globalization, what we are looking at talking about is world economy. And this world economy has become increasingly interdependent over a period of time. And when we say interdependence is because of the factors that it has led to, improved trade. It has led to freedom of movement of, people across borders. And this has also led to what is called financial mobility. That means you're able to transact money, send money across from one location to the other, from one country to the other. And this has all happened because of the improvements in technology. So when we talk about what has caused globalization, this particular figure here actually tells you what has caused globalization. It has been caused by improvements in technology. It has been caused by lowering of tariffs or trade barriers, as I would put it in a bigger term. It has happened because it has led to improvements in transportation systems. So we don't just have today sea freight, we have rail, road transport via air as well, and also containerization. So if I use the word containerization, what I mean by that essentially is that there has been a rapid adoption of, let's say, in a sense, steel transport. That means transportation by sea freight, which is normally containers. So we see lots of this being manufactured, lots and lots of goods and services being manufactured in China, and huge ships or container-based ships are then, shipping this material across to various countries and various continents across the world. And this also has happened because there has been improvement in labor laws or labor mobility, as we say. So across, when the European Union was formed, there was discussion on the freedom of movement of people. There was discussion on fiscal union, which is basically one currency. And as we see from the time the European Union, was formed, and the developments which the European Union has essentially, done in terms of, let's say, promoting trade and, bilateral trade, or promoting, conducive policies which allow, countries now to, let's say, do business or transact business, is something that we see, in the last 60 years or 70 years. European Union, we normally see, was formed in 1945. There were some changes to that which happened in the, I think it was the Lisbon Agreement. But generally speaking, in the last 60 years, we've seen European Union has made a tremendous dent into how countries in Europe actually negotiate and transact and do business with other powerful blocs like China, Americas, Asia Pacific, and other countries in the world. So here, this concept of what has actually caused or led to globalization are these some of the factors. And what has happened is, when American companies started expanding, or when European big conglomerates like Mercedes, Volkswagen, and in the automobile sector, there are companies in the other sector as well, when they started to expand, in cosmetics, perfumes, wines in particular, these companies started to sell not just their goods and services in their homeland, but also across geographies and across continents. And that has led to what is called globalization. Now, if we understand what is globalization, we also understand what are the factors which has caused globalization. Then we need to understand what are the factors which are driving it further now. So we are in globalization 4.0, or the fourth phase of globalization. What are the factors which are driving it now? So when we talk about factors which are driving it now in this context today, and for the next few years and decades to come, we talk about factors like technological factors. There will be political factors, political alliances, trade impacts, trade pacts which will be done. You look at market drivers, changing demand of consumers, which will be essentially market drivers, cost drivers, consumers, companies, economies are looking at driving economies of scale. That means they want to lower the price. So here, wherever you find cheap labor, wherever you find cheaper raw material, cheaper manufacturing base or facilities, you're going to be looking at companies trying to move to that particular country, nation, or geography for their manufacturing needs. And that would be basically looking at driving costs lower, which means goods at the shop that you buy, people want cheaper goods and they want, cheaper commodities. And then we look at competition. There is a lot of Me Too products available. There is very little differentiation amongst certain categories of products because the USPs are pretty much non-existent, or unique selling propositions are pretty much non-existent. So in this case, when we look at competition and certain sectors in which there's fierce competition, it helps the consumers get lower prices and more choice. And that also is one of the drivers of globalization. So we look at globalization, what has caused globalization, and what are the factors which are driving globalization. We need to be clear about these three things in particular to look at studying this unit further. Is that okay?
Yes, of course.
Now, some of the bits that I've explained, I've put it here. Containerization is one of the terms that you would need to look at, is because cost of transport through sea freight is the cheapest. Air freight is the most expensive. So when goods and, say, for example, during COVID vaccination programs across the countries, vaccinations were transported through air freight. But when you look at furniture, automobiles, some of the heavier products, or products which are, not the products which are not carried or easily carried, or the costs are very high if they have to be transported through air or rail, then in those cases you look at sea transport, and that would tend to be containerization, which is because the shipping industry is able to transport everything in bulk because of the big containers, the 24, 40 foot, and that is where the origination of this term containerization has come. And obviously, some of the other factors which I mentioned, technological factors, economies of scale, differences in tax system, less protectionism, they are other factors which also contribute to the driving of globalization. Now, if I look at taxation system, just to give you an example, now if we look at within the European Union, Ireland has the lowest corporation tax, which is about 12%. So that means if a company is looking at expanding and opening subsidiaries in Europe and transacting from a particular country and wants access to the European market, the country of choice in terms of opening the business would be Ireland, because the corporation tax is 12%. But when we look at other countries like France, Germany, UK, corporation tax in the UK, 21%, look at Germany, 25%, or 29%, if I am correct, and France, 25%. You look at Italy and Spain, somewhere in the similar regions. And that is where sometimes when companies from outside the European Union, which are looking at opening offices or operations in Europe to be able to transact, they would consider, tax systems. So when they look at different tax systems and they look at where they would need to pay lower taxes or have the ability to be able to repatriate money back to their head office or their home country, which is profits, they would need to look at tax systems. So in this case, the European Union, or when you look at VAT and implication of VAT, and if VAT has to be applied on goods and services across when you transact or sell them across Europe, there is one such system which has been put in place, and that allows the European Union to control the freedom of free movement of goods, and that would be looking at differences. They are trying to do away with the differences in tax systems, so making it easier from a point of view of import, export, movement of goods, and making it less paper, making it more paper friendly. So less paperwork is required, and the transportation or movement of goods can happen easily. So when we look at NAFTA, which is the North American, free trade agreement under the new name, the reason of the treaty between Canada, Mexico, and US was to allow free movement of goods across the borders in these three countries, and that meant that they had to lower their tariffs and do away with the different tax systems. And as a result, what they did was the three countries looked at proposing taxation. If, say, for example, automobiles are being exported from America to Mexico, or Mexico back into America or into Canada, then the taxation system across, rather than have different tax systems, what they decide was, under the agreement, having a single tax across different sort of categories, but different taxes could be across different categories, would have been easier, and that has allowed the freedom of movement of goods to happen seamlessly than being involved in paperwork, and you pay a different tax in US and a different tax in Mexico and a different tax in Canada. Although you literally have that, but for certain goods that they are exported and imported as raw material or as finished good, the taxation agreements or the treaties have allowed these taxation agreements to be standardized and put in place. There is a very good video, which I'm not going to play, but it's a very good video that you can view offline, which is going to talk you through. It's a video by a business school, an organization called Business 101. And because there are plethora, there's a lot of these kind of videos available. I think it's a 10-minute video, but this video explains in detail the three parts of globalization. What is globalization? What has caused globalization? And what are the factors driving globalization? And I think is a good watch if you want to visually understand the three things that we've discussed, in terms of important aspects of globalization. And this video summarizes that in a good amount of detail. Now, with this bit of understanding, what we also want to do is get into some of the assessment criteria, just to cover some of the indicative content which is being mentioned. Now, one of the things that we look at in general, which has been mentioned about, is that what is the term global economy? So when we talk about the term global economy, we are talking about interconnected economic systems. So in terms, one of the things that I want to put is, if you look at, economics and economic systems, you need to be aware of what are the various different types of economic systems that we generally get to see or are aware of. Now, in terms, there are three basic types of economic systems that we generally look at and we study. One is capitalism, which is also called market economy. The second is socialism, or this is called planned economy. And the third is mixed, which means it could be a combination of capitalism and socialism. And then we also talk about, apart from these three, certain types of economical, let's put it this way, economical systems, which include things like traditional economy, barter economy. We also talk about sustenance economy, but they are lesser known or lesser prevalent systems when we look at, say, 210 countries across the globe. Either the countries have a socialist system or socialism, they have a capitalist system, or something which is market economy. The government does not interfere with I'll go into the details of that. And the third is mixed. That means it could be both the types working within the country. Now, if we look at these three different types of systems, and why it is important is because when we talk about economic system and we talk about the various examples and why they are important, is because here what we are going to see is the society produces and distributes goods and services in a particular fashion or a manner. And this involves, how they are made, how they are distributed, and how people get access to them. Now, when we look at the definition of the economic system, this would mean that the society which actually produces, distributes, and consumes goods and services in a way that allows consumers to buy these goods in exchange for money would be termed as the meaning of the term economy or an economic system. Now, the functions of the economic systems we'll have to go into detail, but is something which I would suggest if I make a handout available, it'll be a good read for you to go through to get an understanding of what are the three types of economic systems, what are their functions, and how does it make the economy within a country work. Now, if I briefly say, let's put it this way, functions of economic system, if I just briefly write. So one is what to produce. That is the first question which you will look at asking when you want to decipher what kind of an economic system it is. How much to produce? So second part will be how much do the companies or manufacturing facilities have to produce? Then the third is how do you produce? Is it raw material taken from the earth? Is it raw material coming from other countries or other subsidiaries from which it gets? And then who gets what? In terms of what is to be produced and how it is to be produced. Now, sometimes when in certain countries, you would see, if I go into socialism in China, the telecoms market in general is controlled by the government. The banking sector is controlled by the government. So here, who gets what is decided by the government. That means there is defense, for example, has no external contractors or private partners or companies in it. That is totally in the hands of the government. Financial system within the Chinese market is owned by the government. So it's a socialist economy, and obviously who gets what is decided by the government. Now, if you are having a capitalist system or a mixed system, then how do, say, for example, in this case, there are three other questions which could be asked. What is to be produced, how much is to be produced, and how it is to be produced. So when you get the answers to these four questions, what you are going to see is that you are going to be able to get to something what is called an economic system or a type that you can actually then define. Now, when we talk about these in general, we will talk about what is called the term global economy, because what we do get to see is that the various, let's put it this way, the various, cogs in the production of goods and services are connected. And when we talk about connections and when we talk about connectivity, what we are looking at is talking about the different types of, economic systems, which we can generally see, actually working within the economy. Is that okay?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Now, when we talk about, economics and economic interdependence, what we are essentially meaning there is that we are referring to a close relationship between different economies because they rely on each other for various economic activities. That could be trade, resources, and it could be financial resources or finances. And these are exchanged between different nations. And that would basically make us dependent on each other. Now, currently, when you look at the US dollar, that is the main, let's say the currency for international transaction of trade across countries, whether you buy and sell goods and services in Europe or in other countries. What has happened is American dollar or US dollar has been the currency of, let's say, the favorite currency of the currency which has got established. So any fluctuations in dollar either makes the imports cheaper or, exports dearer, because if the dollar to your currency goes up, then your imports become cheaper, exports become dearer. And if the other way happens, then you are able to import more, but export, less, because people will not be buying things at a higher price. When we talk about trade and when we talk about economic interdependence, this happens because of this exchange of trade or exchange of goods and services which are happening between various nations and various, economies. Now, when European Union looks at doing trade, they are pushing what is called the European, currency and euro, And that means any sort of transaction which any countries or blocks do with the European Union, they normally do an exchange in euro against that particular currency. So there is no way that one currency is acceptable across the globe. So that is why when financial transactions have to be done, or investments have to be done, or trade has to be carried out, there is economic interdependence amongst various nations, countries, continents. Now, the other thing that we want to also understand is when we talk about, the essence of global economy, the whole essence of global economy is based on certain key aspects. What are these key aspects? That countries are trading amongst themselves. Now, if UK was to produce, say, for example, strawberries, and it sells all the consumption of the production of strawberries, and its consumption meets its criteria, that means they are not having any surplus. That means UK has nothing to export, let's say, to other countries. So in this case, its domestic consumption is production is equal to its consumption. But assuming if UK's domestic production is higher than what it can sell internally in the market, then the first thing which British farmers will essentially do is they will need to establish trade and treaties with other countries wherein they can sell their surplus output. And that would mean that they will need to do trading, which means they will have to sell their goods on time to be able to realize the benefits in terms of receiving money for it. And that starts off, let's say, international trade. Now, international trade can be governed by tariffs, structures, rules, regulation, and agreements. Now, if we were to sell, for example, strawberries outside the EU, there would be requirements that we would need to meet, or legislation, or certain types of, let's say, standards that we will need to meet. And that would allow us to then sell this in outside the EU in any other country. Now, if I look at, give me another example, what you would look at is, for example, there are lots of fruit and veg which comes from outside the EU into the UK. Now, there are sometimes grapes which come from South Africa. You'll see bananas which come from Costa Rica. Now, there are trade agreements, or some sort of treaties which have been done within the European Union, although British and UK is not a part of EU now. So there are treaties or trade agreements which the UK government is doing directly with some of the countries, wherein it allows these produce of the goods to essentially come into the UK without any tariffs or any additional duties applied, which were already negotiated when UK was a part of EU. Mm-hmm. And this allows free movement of goods. And in particularly when we look at these kind of products, which are grocery products, they have a shelf life. So these trade tariffs are done in order to facilitate the freedom of goods to happen with less and less of paperwork, so that they are perishable items, but they should be able to then, reach the market without having to spend too much time in warehouses or, under clearance or within customs. Similarly, when we talk about some of the other aspects that we need to understand when we talk about global economy are things like capital flows. That means money, which, companies can invest in other countries as foreign direct investment, or FDIs. Sometimes we also look at, let's put it this way, companies investing in their own subsidiaries or opening up new offices or operations. So in those cases, companies would list on stock exchange as well, and flotation of, stocks or listing of a company on a stock exchange like DAX, FTSE, and New York Stock Exchange or NY would basically involve some legal ramifications. But once they are listed, that means the company has shareholders in different geographies. So there you're looking at companies selling shares, bonds, and inviting public to participate and become a part owner of the company, and that would allow capital flow of investments to happen when companies are expanding or looking at taking operations or internationally expanding their operations. You would see labor mobility. That means sometimes you'd see if in certain subsidiaries, like if I give an example of Marks and Spencer or any of the UK company like Tesco, you generally see when they open a new office in a new location like Turkey, Greece, Germany, wherever they are present, they will normally have some of the top management from the head office, be involved in the operations on that side. And that is under the freedom of labor, because they would need certain key people from the company to be present in terms of driving the operations on that side. Let me give you another example. So when we talk about, say, for example, freedom of labor, say, for example, if when Brexit was happening, sorry, there was a lot of discussion on, car companies like Nissan, and some of the Japanese manufacturers like Toyota, which manufacture cars in the UK. And because UK was a part of the European Union, there were no tariffs applied, and these cars could be sold in the European geography or in other countries. So the government essentially sought, let's say, assurances from companies like Honda, Toyota, and Nissan to ensure that they would not be driving away their operations from the UK when Brexit was being done, and vice versa. The government, also gave commitments on the labor movement side that if they need to bring in expert manpower from other locations to be able to work within factories in the UK, that would not be prohibited by the UK government. And that allows the labor mobility to happen when we look at the automobile industry in the UK in particular after Brexit. So similarly, other points like information and technology transfer and financial markets play a very important role, which are basically parts of the global economy. One of the things that we also saw as a ripple effect of Brexit was that a lot of companies wanted to move headquarters from London to Paris or other locations in Europe in order to maintain their financial mobility or freedom, which was part and parcel of when UK was a part of European Union. But because now UK has exited the European Union, they weren't clear on how the labor, how the financial laws and legislation would change. And in those cases, as a fail-safe, some of these companies opened up operation or opened up subsidiaries for operations within European countries so that they would still have access to the financial markets, which is like not just the FTSE stock exchange, but stock exchanges in Frankfurt or in Germany or in France or in other major European economies. And these are some of the key aspects that we have to look at when we talk about global economy. So multinational corporations, regulation and policy, and obviously economic interdependence, which tends to happen because countries have a nations and countries have a relationship between or different economies, and these tend to be dependent on economic activities, trade, and resource exchanges, which could be financial resources, labor resources, or legislation, which are predominantly driving the trade across various geographies. Is that okay? Any questions on this?
No, there's quite a lot of things, but I will go through them again.
All right.
It's a vast topic, but I don't think I have any questions at the moment.
Right, okay. Now, the other term that we want to understand, is global business environment. So when we talk about global business environment, what we are looking at is we are referring to external factors or forces that are going to, influence international business activities and decisions. Now, it's a very simple concept to understand. When you look at a business, and the business can be affected by internal factors or external factors. Now, internal factors are going to be within the control of the organization, and they sometimes are also called micro factors. These factors could be if you have certain number of employees leaving the organization, or if the resources within the organization are finite, for example, insufficient financial, finances, or in some cases, if the CEO leaves the organization, then these factors of somebody leaving the company facing financial shortages is basically going to affect that company and its own operations. It is not going to be affecting all the other competitors or similar type of companies which produce goods and services in the market. And because these factors like employees, finances, resources, and administration and operation side of things are within the control of the company and the company's management, these factors are called internal factors. When we talk about macro factors or external factors, these are factors which can affect the business from outside. And when we talk about these factors which can affect the business from outside, they will not just affect your business in a particular sector, they will all affect they will all affect all the businesses which are doing similar kind of production of goods and services. So when we look at COVID-19 pandemic, it affected businesses big and small across the board. It was not that only, educational institutes were affected, or universities were closed, or factories were closed. They were closures all across the board, whether it was automobile, construction, sector, financial services sector, everything was affected. So in this case, these kind of factors which are not in the control of the organization and can affect the business and its activities from outside, and it affects everyone similarly and has some, the severity might be different because depending on the industry or the goods and services you produce, but in general, these factors can affect businesses from outside and they are not in their control, and they are termed as what are called external factors. Now, when we talk about these external factors, these can be divided into what is called 5 different types. And this is something which I think, when we talk about Pastel and Pastel analysis, if I bring up an image over onto the slide, what you will generally see is then when we talk about these factors, then the categorization of these factors, which can affect the global business environment in any country or any location, then we talk about segregating these factors into what are called these factors, which is an acronym called Pastel, and it stands for, P stands for political factors, E for economic, S for social, T for technological, E for environmental, and L for, legal factors. So when we look at this in terms of a term that how come, global economic business environment is affected by external factors, we use a framework called Pastel Analysis, and this framework is used to assess and analyze what are the external macro environmental factors that can impact the organization or the industry or the market. And this acronym of Pastel actually stands for political, economic, socio-cultural, technological, environmental, and legal factors. Now, by examining these factors, a business and its decision makers, which are the key people in decision making, the management, can better understand the external forces that might be affecting its operation and what kind of effect does it create, what are the opportunities it creates, and what are the risks that it creates when these external factors act on the business. And when we look at these, we can categorize these different type of factors by looking into going into detail, which are things like government policy, political stability, corruption, foreign trade policy, tax policy, labor law policy, and these are all the political ramification or political factors which will essentially be affecting the business. Similarly, we can discuss, factors which are going to be related to economic factors, which are things like interest rates, inflation in the country, disposable incomes, unemployment rate. They are all tending to be what are called economic factors. Now, it is important for any organization and business to understand how these factors affects its own activity when they look at operating within a particular environment. And this is important because if they know what are the problems or issues that they're going to face, then they can be better prepared to, handle these particular issues and problems. So when we talk about, say, for example, these factors, and what I've done is I've detailed them out in 1 or 2 slides, which give you a glimpse into when we say political factors, what are these political factors? The political factors that we talk about, in general, when we say political factors, they will tend to be things like, politics within a country, which means if the government is stable, the government policy, how they're introducing it, what is the policy towards trade? Are they favorable towards allowing companies to trade freely? Are they favorable towards, are the policy favorable or conducive to be able to allow, imports from happening, imports that a company would want to do from outside? What could be the taxation that would be applicable? And is there any restriction on the movement of, labor? What are the various labor laws under which I can bring, workers to the country, or, have sponsored workers being brought into the country? These would be all part and parcel of political, or political effect of, political factors or effect of political factors on the business. Similarly, we look at economic factors and social, economic, cultural factors. What could be social cultural factors? Any idea?
Sorry?
What could be factors that would be classed as socio-cultural factors?
Social.
Yes. So when we look at social factors, think about population
or advertisements, that kind of thing.
Think about population. So when we talk about social factors in population, we think about demographics, we think about income levels, we talk about age, whether when we look at talking about a country like Italy, in Europe, the most aging population is in Italy. So here, a middle income class is getting squeezed because we have more people as senior citizens who are at an age where they are not able to contribute towards the economic activity. So these could be, socio-cultural factors which businesses need to look into. Things like population, age of the population. You look at, things like income disposal or income earning ability of the population, and things which are related to lifestyle and cultural barriers, if there are any. They would be language, for example. If countries look at opening business in a particular country in Europe, they look at English as the main language of transaction, and they generally end up choosing either UK or Britain, or in places or in cities and towns wherein they know language could not be a barrier. So they look at sometimes some of these factors, and they are going to be considered as what are called socio-cultural factors. Now, I have drawn up some slides here to basically cover some of the aspects and components of global business environment, which are essentially different types of factors which can affect the business from outside. And these factors can be classed under what is called Pastel Analysis, and they would be giving the business an idea that whether the global environment or the environment in which they want to go and start a business, launch a business, establish a new subsidiary or a business, whether it is going to be conducive, whether it's going to be favorable, whether it's not going to be favorable. And when the company looks at carrying out such analysis, they look at the global business environment or an environment in that particular country, and the study of that environment in terms of how it will affect the business and its operations, or its setup and its operations initially, would be done through the route of what is called Pastel Analysis. And this would help the company identify and easily understand what are the key areas in which they are going to face challenges, and what are the key areas in which they will need to mitigate their risk and plan ahead, so that their operations or their setup and operations in that country are successful. Is that okay?
Yes.
Now here you would also be looking at understanding things which are a part of economics, which is what I would put as is that when we talk about economic drivers, what is driving the market, what is creating the demand from consumers in the market, these are called pull and push factors. So sometimes you would see that there's a great demand for a product in the market. If there's a new product which comes out and it starts to stick with consumers, that means it starts to be appreciated by consumers, then you would generally see that the demand of the product skyrockets. And the market condition, the price point, and the place and the introduction that the company has done has all created conducive environment. That means favorable environment for the product to be able to get sold in volumes. And this would mean that the market is treating the product fairly, and there are pull factors which are driving the demand for that particular product. And when we talk about push, which means that sometimes you would see certain stock does not move, certain type of products do not create traction with consumers. So the companies will have to do a lot of advertising, a lot of promotions, give out incentives to be able to liquidate that inventory, or start the consumers or customers to essentially start buying the product. So in those cases, you would generally see that the organization will push initiatives through advertisement, promotions for the products to be able to get traction with consumers, and they would be termed as what are called push factors. So this concept, of push and pull also drives globalization. Now, if we see, assuming an example I'm giving, hypothetical, last year Apple introduced the iPhone 14 Pro. Now, if there was a lot of traction for iPhone 14 Pro, and the product was innovative because it was the first phone in the market with 48 megapixel camera. Some of the improvements that they had done. So what it allowed when the company launched the product to do was that it allowed it to create a demand on the basis of its unique selling proposition, like a bigger phone, a faster camera, a faster processor, bigger battery life, and a front-facing and a back camera with innovative features. That created demand for that product. Now, because there was demand for that product, that means the company had to look at increasing their production, and that increasing of the production meant that the product was being successfully let's put it this way, liked. It was successful and the customers were liking it, and they were these factors were driving the demand for that product. So in globalization, when we talk about the process of push and pull factors, these factors contribute to what is called integration of economies, cultures, and societies on a global scale. Because the product has been a hit, that would mean the company would place more orders with its suppliers and contractors. That would mean more raw material will be required. And that in general would mean there will be more transaction of business amongst various countries, nations, because the product is driving the demand or the consumer demand is being driven because the product has been a successful product. So these are going to be termed as what are called push factors, because they will push for technological advancements. They will push for deregulation or liberalization. They'll be pushing for access to more resources. And this would mean that there will be more demand for this product, which can be sold in different markets. Pull factors, on the other hand, would be if the company sees that it is not creating traction with the sales in a particular market, it would feel the need to expand to other markets. So what they will need is expansion to other countries where they are not selling the iPhone because the iPhone is not proving to be a hit in the existing markets in which they sell. So in order to drive sales, what they're going to do is use the pull factors, and they're going to start trying to go into newer markets to be able to seed the demand for that product. They would look at driving the cost lower, because if the customers are not essentially liking the product, then pull factors come in, and that would mean the company would need to drive down its costs in order to make the products more affordable. It would also look at economies of scale. That means it could need to look at producing this good much more competitively or cheaply, so that it is able to go across and meet the demand in terms of reducing the price for that product. And these side of things are called push and pull factors. So what I'm going to do is, for this particular assessment criteria, in order for you to understand what is global business environment and what are the factors externally or factors which can affect the business from outside, you would also need to understand these two terms, which we term as two terminologies. One is basically reading about the economic systems, the three different types: capitalist, socialist, and mixed. And the second would be to also understand what are pull and push factors and how do they look at how do they look at controlling the global business environment. Okay. So that's a specific handout I will put in so that it is related to economics, but it will be good to read and get a bit of understanding, on this side, so that you are aware of some of the economic terms as well, which are used when we talk about, globalization. Now, the last assessment criteria in this is to discuss what are the key issues which are driving globalization. So some part of this is a bit repetitive, but when we talk about the positive and negative effects of globalization, which we discussed yesterday, the positive effects are the ones which are driving the, globalization. Things like digital revolution, enhancements in transportation. I mentioned to you about the Silk Route, which China is trying to develop, which is connections in terms to Europe and Africa through the rail route, and that is being termed as the modern Silk Route because it is going to lead to enhancements in the transportation system, which means, for example, a railway line or a service which they've introduced for transportation of goods between China's manufacturing facility in Shenzhen to somewhere in one of the towns in Italy or in Europe. It takes 18 days for the goods to travel from China to the European geography. But if we look at movement through sea freight, it takes in excess of 37 days. So when we look at reducing this time from 37 days through sea freight, which is the ships coming from the China Sea, then to the Indian Ocean, then to the Arabian Sea, then into the Mediterranean Sea, through the Suez Canal into the Mediterranean Sea, and then access to the European markets through Italy or through Felixstowe, say, for example, in the UK, this takes anywhere between 31 to 39 days. Now, if this is transported by railways, this reduces the time to 18 days for goods to be manufactured and transported from China to the European geography. And that is the benefit because of transportation, improvements in the links which China is trying to create, which is the Silk Route as it's been called. And that's an example of transportation. There are other aspects of it, things like economic factors, which is where I would say this push and pull factors, demand side of factors and supply side of factors would come in handy, because you'll understand how the economics of a geography can work essentially when we talk about the pull and push factors. Political changes or agreements which are done between different nations in order to facilitate easier trade and reduce the paperwork in terms of trade involved. And there are different agreements which have been done, which is NAFTA is the old name, but the new agreement name is United States, Mexico, Canada, and in general Americas. The EU as a single market. We have ASEAN, which is the Asian cooperation, regional cooperation, which is signed as a pact between the, I think, 11 countries: Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, Burma, Singapore, and all. So that is the Asian agreement. This allows for trade tariffs to be reduced. This allows freedom of goods to be movement of goods to be done without restrictions. This introduces what is called single tax system or single tariff systems, which allow the movements to happen, and those can only happen if there is political will. That means the governments come to the table, discuss, negotiate, and then agree on a tariff agreement, and that is basically initiated through what is called political change. And in some cases, this leads to deregulation and liberalization. That means certain norms and restrictions in terms of, for example, if certain types of goods have to be imported into Europe, they need to meet certain regulations and guidelines. That means they need to conform to rules or regulations which have been used. For example, fruit and veg, when it is imported into Europe from other countries outside the EU, like Africa, the Indian subcontinent, and Far East, or in Americas, the level of pesticides in the food have to meet or conform to a certain standard. Now, if it is higher, then the whole lot is rejected. So there have been treaties and agreements which have been put in place to ensure that this is brought to a level wherein it is acceptable, it is not harmful to the population in Europe, and obviously it also conforms to the minimum guidelines. And this has happened through political will, agreements, trade tariffs which have been signed, and this is basically nothing but deregulation to a certain extent and liberalization. That means reduction of restrictions on business operations within a particular region, because the businesses are connected and the economies are connected. Both the sides of the parties actually make or gain from this economic trade, and that is where these things have to be sorted. And similarly, we have socio-cultural exchanges, which is Freedom of Speech Act, which is in the UK introduced, that media gets access to certain information by using the Freedom of Information Act. Television and broadcasting can go across various countries and various regions, and this allows exchanges on the societal side to happen, which basically allows closer cooperation and relationship building to happen. Similarly, you have environmental and geographical factors and some of the other factors which I've mentioned for you to read through and understand with an example, that when we talk about, say, consumer demand, what we are looking at is companies getting exposure to global markets. That means there are certain companies which want to expand to a geography, but they haven't sold their products and services there. So what they will happen is the governments will come together, they'll sign a treaty, they will organize events, big international events which will happen, and that will provide access to, through exhibitions and events, that will provide the company a soft entry into the market by testing the populations, by introducing their products. And as a result, the company then makes a successful foray into that market for selling its goods. And this generally tends to be by testing the demand for their products in a particular market, and companies, without having to set up full-fledged operations, are allowed to import 100% manufactured goods into a country for a certain period of time. And after which, what they do is they start either local operations or start working on integration of operations with local subsidiaries and suppliers to be able to mass produce those goods internally, which means they will save on costs and lead times which are required for servicing consumer demand. A classic example that I would give you is Tesla. When it started to produce cars in the US, it was selling these cars fully imported from the US in European market. But of late, when the testing has happened and obviously there's an acceptability established for these cars, Tesla has opened up manufacturing facilities in Europe, in China, and obviously from these locations, it is exporting to other countries. And because the consumer demand is growing and there's an acceptability of these cars, what has happened is that it is also exposing itself to different needs and demands of diverse consumers across the globe. And for the European region, it has introduced certain specific variations in the model, which are more favorable for European customers as against when it sells models in China or in the US, in other major markets. And that is because it needs to tailor its products to meet the consumer demand in that particular geography. Is that okay?
Of course.
Good stuff. So essentially what I would want to do now is draw your attention towards, one or two good articles which I have essentially, provided on Moodle. And these particular articles, in addition to what we are discussing, are going to be useful for you to get a handle on what we've discussed in learning outcome today. So just let me very briefly, show you these things which are up on Moodle. And what you can then do is, go and read some of these in addition to what we have covered today, for discussing learning outcome 2. So let me just bring this up and share that with you. So looking at, just 1 second. Okay, so here we go. So if you go on to Moodle, that's the presentation here. There are 2-3 good articles which I put in. One is what factors are contributing to recent, globalization in recent years. What are the factors driving globalization? And there's a World International Monetary Fund report, which basically talks about the, the impact of globalization on economies in general. So this is a good read, a couple of pages, a 10-15-minute read. This particular, report, which is what factors are driving globalization, is a research report, which is a good read, for about 20 minutes. And then the third one, which is this economic report from, the international, I think the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, IMF, which talks about globalization and, equality. And there is one other article which I want to put, for the purposes of reading, which is an article primarily on the push and pull of globalization. And this article is a good read again, just putting this across.
Okay.
Which will give you a sense of, what we were discussing, that what is push and pull from an economic perspective in driving a global economic environment. This article gives and explains this in a much more, efficient bit that would allow you to get a handle on, some of the, the bits on economic terminology that you need to know, for learning outcome 2.
I see.
and I would put it this way, that I'm going to put another article in, which is, what are the different types of economic systems. And that particular article, that if you read, it's a bit of a comparative, and that would allow you to understand the various types of economic systems that are prevalent, across the globe, and how they are different, how is one is different from the other. Although you would generally see that some of these articles might be quite detailed, but my suggestion would be still to look at going through them, just to get a hang of, some of the economic side of things or terms. And if I put this across now, the one that I'm going to put in is taken from the European Parliament, and it's a bit of a handout which summarizes, the three different types. That would be a brief version, but there is a version that I'm going to obviously put, and that would allow you to read the detailed side as well. And this one is here.
I see. Okay.
Is that okay? The detailed version is primarily going to be, the version which is typically, a report, and that report basically provides you a comparative of how capitalism versus socialism is actually, moving within the European market, or within the global market. So that could be a detailed report, but if you're still further interested in studying, then that could be a report that you could read, and that's this one here.
Comparative economic systems. Okay.
So this will cover the, certain different types of countries, models, and then compare capitalism versus socialism.
I see.
Okay. Good stuff. So thank you so much for joining the session today. If you think of any questions, you can email them to me. And what I'll do is I'll send you the codes for this session tomorrow and for Monday and the 31st, so that we are able to bring this unit to a bit of a close.
Yes, tomorrow it's 11 in the morning, right?
11 in the morning, yeah. Tomorrow is 11, and then also 28th is 11, and 31st is also 11.
Also 11. Okay. Just to confirm the times, so I can
11, yeah.
make my alarms.
Sure, no worries. Excellent. Thanks for joining, Andy, and I will see you tomorrow then.
Yes, I will see you tomorrow. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Take care. Bye.